Hey guys, it's Lion here with Hobbies Man. Once again, and today we're going to be doing another book review. We're going to be looking at the Primogenitor Saga Volume 3, called Consular Times, written by Robert M. Kerns, published by Nightfall Press, which is his own publisher. He publishes under Amazon, so you can get his books there. The demographic here is adult, although, like I've explained before, I think technically a YA reader can read this, but there are some elements that are implied that are definitely for adults, right? So also the fact that I don't think YA readers will be interested in reading this is kind of my thought process there. In terms of genres, this is very vaguely a haremlet story, as in there is a harem in the story, but it's actually treated more like a polygamous polyamorous relationship, not polygamy, not a polygamous one, a polyamorous relationship, and that's not necessarily the same as a haremlet story, but it does fall in the genre on a technicality, right? The same way like Wheel of Time does. It's an urban fantasy, although if there was such a thing as rural fantasy or like cottagecore fantasy or like Pacific Northwest fantasy, this would be that. And of course, it is a shifter novel, right? So, yeah, it does not have an adaptation. And although usually I would say that this would be pretty good as like a comic book or an animated show, I don't think that enough happens in this book to warrant this one specifically being part of the story. If they ever did an adaptation, they would have to kind of push through this one pretty fast. And that's kind of disappointing because that makes it so that this is probably my lowest rated book that I've read by Robert M. Kerns, right? So this is a 3 out of 5 for me because, well, there's a variety of factors actually. The other day I was reading a, what's it called, like an author's letter. I signed up to Robert M. Kerns, letter, and he sends it out every once in a while. He sent one recently, and he was talking about how he's not really interested in writing Primogenitor Saga anymore. And he'll finish book 4 and he'll finish book 5 and he'll probably leave it at that. And I'm perfectly fine with that in concept, right? Like the idea that, maybe the author is not interested in writing the book that he's writing anymore. That's totally fair, especially like from a self-published author who, isn't really like beholden to a company that owns his books, or that needs him to publish something else because they need the money that comes from his book, right? However, as a fan of his, as a fan of the series, it is kind of disappointing to know that the author is no longer interested in the story, and it definitely kind of shows in this book because ultimately nothing much happens, and the few things that do happen feel like they should be really meaningful and really lead to a giant set of a lot of ramifications. And I don't know that 2 books in Robert M. Kerns' normal style will really be enough to cover that, right? So it's kind of disappointing, and it kind of did kill my enthusiasm for the series a bit, actually a lot. But I still enjoyed my time with this book. Like it was easy to read. I read it basically in a day. I have no difficulty consuming this content, right? Like I enjoy it in the moment. However, it was like when I started thinking back on the book that I realized, oh, this is really not like good compared to the other 2. Like it's not horrible. Like there's still like, redeeming qualities to it. But I was riding this high with this series, and this one really definitely tanked. And you can argue that it's because it's the middle book in the series, especially if it's supposed to be a 5-book series. You can definitely argue that it has like middle book syndrome or whatever it's called, that kind of lull in the story. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of things that can be done with this type of setup that could have avoided that, right? So enough talking about that. Let's talk about the premise here. It's kind of difficult to kind of come up with one because I don't really know what's important and what isn't, right? But basically, Wyatt has to deal with the fact that he is now the counselor or the consular for the Shifter Nation, and what does that actually mean? He has to come up with what that actually means, and it turns out that it means that he's basically the king of all shifters in the American continent, not just U.S. and Canada. Like, it includes Mexico and other regions, as far as I remember. I think actually, no, sorry. It only involves North America, which Robert M. Kerns defines as the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. And I want to nitpick that that's not actually the case. North America is everything from Canada, including Greenland, and down into Panama, right? The Panama Canal is what divides North from South America, although technically the Americas total are one single continent, right? The same way that Europe and Asia are one continent, but they divide them based on like a very specific line, right? So, and I think it's a mountain range. In the Americas, the defining, middle of the road section that defines North and South is the Panama Canal. And maybe Robert M. Kerns meant it as in like there's not shifters beyond Mexico, so it's not important. But I very much doubt that that's the case. I think he just didn't know, or was using like a kind of an outdated view about what North America is, right? But either way, it's not really here or there. And he has to deal with that consequence of like, now I'm the king. Like, what do I do, right? So it sounds interesting, but nothing much happens. So let's move on to the plot here. It basically opens on Burke, who is basically dealing with the fact that she is now a shifter, right? And it's very reminiscent of how Wyatt woke up in the first book. And I like that. I think that the mirroring or the parallelism is good. However, there's a lot of time spent on Burke, and it doesn't actually pay off in this book. So it felt like it was unnecessary, right? But basically, most of the time spent on her is like, what's going on? Is she okay? Is she going to shift or not? Oh, she shifted. Okay, moving on. I need her around me just in case to see if I can, train her to be a shifter, because it's like a thing. Basically, if you turn someone, you are now their like parental figure as they get adjusted to the society that they now live in, right? Which is cool, but Wyatt can't do that because he's only been a shifter for 6 months, right? So he doesn't really know anything either. But he doesn't have a parental figure because one, he's a primogenitor, so people assume that he knows, and two, the guy that turned him was crazy, right? So they had to kill him, or he died or something. I can't remember. And so Burke is just kind of there, right? And there's kind of this element of like a relationship between her and Hauser, but we never get a clear, definitive, like, yes, they are together, or no, they're not together. Just a lot of hints. And again, I feel like it's one of those things where like you should just say what it is and move on, right? So yeah, that happens, and then we move on. Mina Vickers arrives with her sick son in tow. They try to establish consulate, and this is basically the main aspect of the story. The main like story in Precious is, are we gonna heal her son? And what about this consulate thing? And the problem with this consulate kind of thing is it goes around in circles the whole book, like 3 times. Like they arrive, they decide, are we going to build a consulate? Wyatt is like, well, sure, but I don't think that it's necessary. And then he convinces Mina. So he's like, okay, Mina is convinced. She's not going to make a consulate, but she has to ask the president if that's okay. And so now he has to convince the president, and then he convinces her. And so they're done for sure. And then a Canadian representative shows up. And the whole fucking dog and pony show has to happen again, and they have to go through the whole situation of like, there is no reason for a consulate because we are members of this nation. We think of ourselves as members of this nation. It is insulting to have to force a consulate or something similar, an embassy, on lands that already are owned by Americans, right? So this happens multiple times throughout the book, and at one point, I was kind of upset about it. I was like, dude, make this the beginning of the story and then move on from it. Like, this didn't have to be a recurring issue across the whole novel, because Wyatt is right from the beginning. There is no reason for any of this to be happening, beyond the fact that it was necessary for Mina Vickers to be introduced so we could introduce her son, so that we could build up the fact that, shifting is difficult, and there is a possibility for new primogenitors to show up with every new shifter that we have, right? So like once you got Mina Vickers in and you went through the first consulate issue, I feel like it should have gone away completely, and they should have moved on from something else, right? So, yeah, as this is happening, Doc is asked about his opinion on turning Noah, and he's like, I gotta see him. I can't just make an opinion like that. And so he does, and it takes kind of like half of the book before we kind of decide what we're gonna do with Noah, right? Which is Mina's son. Then a bunch of back and forth happens. Eventually, Burke manages to turn into her animal form, and it turns out that she is not a smilodon. She's actually an American lion. And interesting, she turns into a primogenitor, but she doesn't turn into the same one as Wyatt. And I don't understand why this would be, unless this is actually how shifters work and it's just not explained later on, or it was a deliberate choice so that Burke would not happen to automatically fall under Wyatt's harem, right? So, I mean, she could have not been in his harem and still been a smilodon, but I think that my reading of this is that Robert M. Kerns didn't feel like that would make sense, and so he decided to turn her into a different type of what's it called, Pleistocene feline, right? So it works out either way. Like, it's cool. I like the fact that she is another Pleistocene era big cat, but I don't know. It's kind of odd. Also, we learn later that smilodons were apparently in Europe, like shifter smilodons were in Europe, and that doesn't make sense to me. But we'll talk about it later. So, yeah, she shifts, and then there's an issue with her shifting because she basically lets her animal take over, and it takes a lot of effort for her to come back. Eventually, she does, thank God, but she could have been stuck in her animal form for a long time if Wyatt hadn't helped her, right? So this is kind of a little bit of an issue, but it wasn't too big of a deal. Then Hauser and her get processed so that they can actually earn their leave, and actually they quit their jobs at whatever agency they work for and decide to move to Precious. So they will now be members of the shifter community. Then we come back to Moira, who was the last character introduced in the last book. And Moira turns out to be a Fae, and she's a traitor to her people because she doesn't want humans to die. And it turns out that Fae are an invading race of magical aliens. And they tried to invade Earth once before, but the ancient shifters, who were all actually primogenitor shifters back in the day, managed to push her back with the help of Merlin, and helped push her people back, the Fae back with the help of Merlin, and now they're back, and they want to try this again. However, because of the way that the Fae work, we don't know if it's going to be tomorrow or in 200 years from now, and we basically have to have preparations done, right? And basically, this is given to us by Miles talking to Wyatt. He teleports them to Avalon, which happens to just be this little tiny hut that smells like mildew and is disgusting. And Wyatt and Miles talk, and it turns out that Miles is about 1,500 years old. He was born in 450-something AD Wales, and eventually, because he was a magician and he had a lot of power, he ended up blasting himself back in time, lasted there some time, and became the Merlin of Legends. And he mentions very clearly that when he was a child, actually, I think it's not when he was a child, back when he went back in time and he became Merlin, he was, alongside a lot of shifters, and they were all primogenitors, and they all happened to be Pleistocene era animals. Now, this is fair, and the Pleistocene was worldwide, right? It's not just America, but all of the shifters that we've had so far are American animals, right? Like the Smilodon, especially the Smilodon popularis or whatever it's called, the one that Wyatt is, it's not a saber-toothed cat that existed in Europe, as far as I'm aware. It was a purely American breed. Like, there was other, like scimitar cats and stuff like that that lived in Europe, but Smilodon popularis, which is the type that Wyatt is, would not have lived there. So, Again, it comes back to my idea that, the magic that creates shifters takes into account the animals that are around them, and if that is the case, there should not be any smilodon shifters in Europe at all, right? But Miles clearly says that he sees them, and then we get some other kind of comments here and there about the fact that shifters came to the Americas long before even the Native Americans. If that is the case, they should have become Pleistocene American animals after they came, not before they came, right? So how does that work? This is something that I feel isn't thought out that well. So we shall see what happens here with that. Miles and Wyatt come back, and basically Miles goes away, and then Moira shows up out of nowhere. She's like, I'm sorry, but I gotta throw myself at your mercy because I just saw Merlin and I'm deadly afraid of him and I need your protection. And Wyatt is like, okay, cool. What did you actually just do? And it turns out that Moira enslaved herself to Wyatt. And of course, Wyatt, being a good guy, is not happy about this. And he gets kind of angry about it. But he eventually decides to figure out what's going on. He gets Lysa to help him. And then he goes home with Moira in tow, figures out all the issues, calls Vicky, and then he has like a little bit of a war council with them where he explains all of the things that happened, and we finally learn why shifters are the way they are. I thought it was due to like a perception thing, but no, apparently ancient shifters that Miles knew when he was Merlin actually started having children with normal humans, and so they diluted their bloodline, which caused basically their children to have modern animals as their shifter forms, and that's why they can't have like hybrid forms, right? Only Wyatt and a few of the primogenitors can have hybrid forms. Carlene has never shown hers, but I am assuming she has one because Wyatt does. And I'm not sure how this works, but magic, so I will allow it, but a lot of this isn't really making sense to me. It's not difficult to let it go, but I feel like there's better ways to solve these kind of issues to kind of square these circles, I guess is the expression here. And I don't think that it's being done the best. And so they have their war council, they kind of learn what's going on, and they decide they need to do something. Eventually, something happens which causes Wyatt to get angry. Basically, Lysa was dealing with the counselors, and a bunch of them sent her nasty emails, which, okay, I guess. Wyatt reads these emails, gets mad, and so he takes himself and all the women and all the people that he needs with him to the Shifter Council in Chicago. Shows up, murders 6 of them, gets mad at a few other ones, tells them he's the king thanks to their stupid decision to make him counselor, and that no one will disrespect Lysa again. Now, this works and it's a good moment, but it is not the right way to create this moment right now, because we just had like this huge info dump that lets us know that there's going to be big problems, and that there is an important reason why Wyatt might need the counselors, right? And then to undercut it with this kind of ridiculous reason, which is like, nasty emails between shitty coworkers, like that is not reason enough to to do what he does, right? Even by shifter standards, in my opinion. But it ultimately ends up leading to what Wyatt needs to do, thanks to the information he got from Miles, but with an added extra reason that I feel ended up being superfluous, right? So it is what it is. He tasks Moira with creating a report, and then they get sent to Canada to have the final confrontation of the book, which is pretty anticlimactic, to be honest with you. Basically, some shifters are stealing goats or sheep from Canadian farmers, and instead of sending a counselor, they ask for the biggest guy in charge. Like, it's basically asking the president to go down to a farm in Texas to check that the corn is growing correctly. Like, it feels pretty ridiculous, right? So they force him to go to Canada. After they try to force him to have an embassy for Canada in Precious, and he's like, that doesn't make any sense. It's not necessary. And then he has to go figure out what's going on, and he just murders the alpha in charge of this little operation, and he scares the other people enough that they won't ever steal sheep again, at least while he's around, right? So yeah, and then he comes home, and we finally get the real confrontation, which is actually these other shifters that show up with a shitty alpha and some shifter bane knives, and they try to kill him. And, well, it doesn't really work. He murders all of the ones that he needs to murder, and he makes all the other ones run away scared. However, Wyatt is hurt by these shifter bane things, and he has to heal normally. And, well, it really fucking sucks, and he's really, really weak. And so our heroes are despairing at the end of this book. That really didn't have too much going on, although it took me forever to explain it. And it is definitely the worst book in the series so far, including the short story novella, mostly because I think that usually Rodham Kerns does a really good job at balancing the kind of slice of lifey moments with the big, action-y kind of moments. And he didn't manage to do that here. Because one, he escalated the conflict away from, shitty military people trying to, figure out how shifters work, or people kidnapping children. He escalated that to alien invasion, and then didn't treat the rest of the book with the gravitas that entails, right? And so there's a big conundrum here in terms of is this the right way to handle this? And I don't think that it was, and that kind of sucks, right? But it was a choice. I don't hate the choice. I think it's fine. Ultimately, I did enjoy reading this book. It's just when you think about it, it's just dude, what? This is a series of odd choices, not necessarily bad choices. I would like to retract that. I think the right way to word this is a series of odd choices that lead to a less than stellar product compared to the previous two novels, right? So it is what it is. In terms of characters, we get introduced to Mina Vickers, who is fine. She's just another, female government agent type character. And Charlotte, who is the Canadian version of Mina, which they're just generic government people, plus Noah, who happens to heal. And Buddy Carrington is basically his dad now, because he's the one that turned him. And it turns out that Noah turned into something odd. No one really knows what it is, but it is a dog or wolf type character. But it is not the same as Carlene. So I don't know what other big dogs existed in the American Pleistocene, but I assume we'll learn in the next book. Moira gets actual character development, or kind of development at all, and Miles does as well. And overall, I like these two characters a lot. I think that the work done with them was good. There's a lot of answers to a lot of questions posed by their existence. And there's a lot of upcoming war stuff that relates to them too, but it was kind of in the middle of the book instead of throughout the whole book, and I find that to be, not the best. In terms of world building, we get answers to questions I've had about shifters before, about how they got weaker. I'm not necessarily sure I'm satisfied with the answer. I think it works, but it produced other questions, how were there smilodon shifters in Europe? If you would assume that a shifter will shift into the animals that exist in their region, right? Wolves exist everywhere, so werewolves are able to exist everywhere. That makes sense. And if shifters can transform based on if someone is a specific type of animal and they turn someone, that person is going to be turned into the animal that the person that turned them is, right? So that avoids the fact that, they should shift into whatever's in their area. But primogenitor shifters, ancient shifters, or whatever you want to call them at this point, all seem to be American Pleistocene animals, and that means that they should not exist as such in Europe. They should be European Pleistocene animals, which might be kind of similar to an extent. Like, I think Asia and America have very similar types of animals, because there was like the possibility of crossing over, and I think they eventually did at some point. But I don't necessarily know that Europe and America have the same type of animals, right? However, maybe it's to simplify matters and just kind of put all of these animals everywhere so that it's easier. But I don't think that is right, because there's a very clear emphasis on the fact that these are all American animals, right? So I don't know. We shall see if we get answers to that later. We get introduced to the Fae, and we set up the coming war, and in general, the world building was fine. Like, I liked what was happening. I just feel like the implications of the world building weren't mirrored by the stakes of the book, right? If that makes sense. In terms of artwork and fan service, there's no artwork. There's a little bit more suggestive stuff than usual in this book, but nothing too serious. Just a lot of lovey-dovey moments between Wyatt and his female characters, mostly with Lysa, which is kind of interesting because she's the newest member of the group. You would assume that he would have more moments with Carlene and Gabrielle, but he doesn't, which is kind of odd because at this point he kind of has had almost no moments with them, because in the first book he's setting up the fact that he's going to be with them. In the second book it's established, but they don't really have too many moments together because most of that book is setting up Lysa's relationship. And then this one, we get to see Lysa have all of the rewards of being, in a relationship. But we don't get to see Gabrielle or Carlene have the same kind of attention given to them. So it's kind of odd, but it's not important. Ratings-wise, 3 out of 5. This book feels like it spins its wheels a lot. The consulate plot is kind of useless. The embassy plot is kind of useless because it takes too long. And the face stuff is really important, but it's kind of left to the side for kind of these dumb, not very important quick fights, right? Like, I don't know, it just felt kind of weak. There was a lot of odd choices, like I said earlier. So those are my thoughts on Consular Times. I'm kind of sad that this was not as great as the other books. I don't necessarily need it to be on par with my initial feelings with the books, but I would like a level of consistency that just wasn't delivered with. Although, technically, 3 out of 4 books is more than 50%, so there is a level of consistency. But this one really felt weak compared to the others in a way that doesn't feel characteristic of the type of writer that Robert M. Kerns is. So, I don't know. It's kind of odd, but those are my thoughts here. Hopefully, the next book is good. I can't remember the title of it. I thought it was supposed to be Ursus, but I think that Robert M. Kerns decided to change the kind of trajectory of the series, so he gave it a new name, and he mentioned it in his latest newsletter, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Consular Times. Let me know what you guys thought below, and thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.